And welcome to Whiskey Politics. Dave Sussman here, your host and purveyor here at Whiskey Politics. Thanks for all of your support. Subscribing to us on all of our different platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Ricochet, YouTube, and so on. We've got some announcements coming up here shortly regarding some new platforms as well, so stay tuned for those. We're delighted to have today's guest join us, Dave Rubin. You know him from the Rubin Report on YouTube. He is a prolific interviewer, had some fascinating discussions over the years, and is really opening up the discussions between both red pill, blue pill individuals and bringing many of those independent minds together, of which I consider myself one, trying to have discussion and dialogue as opposed to just constantly berating each other in our media, our social media, and the like. And I definitely think he has benefited that discussion over the years. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things today, including how he almost allowed his career to end before it actually started. Of course, with Dave Rubin, we've got to talk about the media. We've got to talk about journalism and bias, fake news, and also how he responds today to his former colleagues at the Young Turks and other leftists that are attacking him and calling the kind of names that none of us want to be called, including a Nazi. I'm going to be asking him who his favorite and least favorite interviews were. I know it's hard. It's like choosing a child, but I'm certainly going to at least try to get him to answer that question and so much more. So pour yourself a drink, relax, and enjoy the Whiskey Politics interview with Dave Rubin. And Dave Rubin, host of the Rubin Report and author of the New York Times bestseller, Don't Burn This Book, joins us today. Welcome, Dave. First of all, congratulations on the bestseller.
Thanks. I was going to say I'm shocked, but I guess I'm not shocked. Well, I'm more shocked that they put me on the list, not that we made the list. I mean, we had done a nice job of pre-sales and all that kind of stuff, and we knew that week one was looking pretty sweet, but it's a little bit of a dirty secret of the publishing world that the New York Times bestseller list, it doesn't really go by best-selling books. They've got their own proprietary method as to what gets on there. And, I hit the New York Times several times quite hard in the book, and I go after them on Twitter a lot. And a lot of what I talk about here related to fake news and media manipulation and journalists destroying journalism, it has a lot to do with them. So it was like 50-50 at best when I got that call. We knew it was coming in at 3:00 last Wednesday, I think. And I knew it was my agent. And it was like, I didn't know which way it was going to go, but they did put me on there. So here we are.
No, that's fantastic. And that's quite an accomplishment. We don't know each other, but I've seen you perform your stand-up comedy. I think it was at Oxnard Levity where you had the Weinstein brothers. Yeah, we also met for a few minutes at the red carpet of No Safe Spaces at the Hollywood premiere. So it's a pleasure having you on. Thanks for joining us.
Great. It's my pleasure to be with you. And as I always tell everybody in these interviews, there is nothing off limits. Wherever you want to go, I will follow you.
Well, that's one thing we do a lot here at Whiskey Politics. But let me start off with, first of all, you are what us independents call a free thinker. And I think you use that term yourself. When I opened your book and just got it last week, so, had a chance to go through it, I did a double take. I thought your people actually sent me the wrong book because it says at the very beginning, for Ben Affleck. And first of all, I like Ben Affleck as an actor. I thought The Town was a fantastic movie. But I think of Ben, and I immediately go to the Bill Maher interview that he had with Sam Harris. And you later explain this in the book. Tell us why you put that in at the very beginning of the book.
Yeah. So to be clear, I do not know Ben Affleck personally. I have never met Ben Affleck. As far as I know, we've never crossed paths. I didn't think he was a great Batman, but yes, he's a perfectly fine actor and director. This had nothing to do with Hollywood Ben Affleck. What it had to do with is what you just laid out right there, that about 4.5 years ago or so, Ben Affleck was on Real Time with Bill Maher, and he was on the panel side of the table, which is when they have the three guests, and they're sort of doing like the View Hot Topics portion of the show. And then the guest that came on the same side of the table as Bill Maher was a mild-mannered neuroscientist named Sam Harris, who actually I did not know at the time. He's obviously been on my show many times since, but I had no idea who he was. And I'm just watching. It's another Friday night. I'm watching Bill Maher, as I've watched him since Politically Incorrect, back in 1998 or something. And what they started discussing was the difference between ideas and people. Meaning that you should be able to criticize any set of ideas, whether it's a religious set of ideas or a political party platform. So you should be able to criticize, say, the Old Testament without being bigoted towards Jewish people, as most people would understand. Or you should be able to criticize the Republican Party platform. That doesn't mean you hate all Republicans. And they went through several examples of these, but they were specifically talking about it related to the Quran, the doctrine of Islam and Muslims. And Sam and Bill were both saying, of course we have to criticize bad ideas, but you don't want to be bigoted towards Muslim people. Everyone knows this. This is something we all intuitively know, that we should never have a set of ideas you can't criticize. If we're to be free as people, then criticizing ideas and battling through what's right and wrong and good and bad and the rest of it, this is a critical piece of our brain that we must apply to everything. And you can't say, oh, no, that one set of ideas, we're just not going to touch that, because some people don't want us to talk about that. That's handing over a lot of power, in many cases, to people that would love to have power over you. So they laid this out rather clearly, quite clearly, actually. And Ben Affleck was huffing and puffing and red in the face and pounding his hands on the table. And the line that he said that really sort of set the internet ablaze, he called them gross and racist. And I was a lefty at the time. I was on the Young Turks network. I had been a progressive. I was a Bernie supporter, the whole thing. But for about a year, I had been thinking something was wrong with the left. It couldn't be that everyone that opposed us was a bigot and a racist and a homophobe, and we were just so morally right all the time. The equation started not to work in my mind. But I didn't have a real world, like fully concrete example of that. And when Affleck did that, maybe it's because he's an A-list movie star, maybe it's because it was Bill Maher, who I think was really the standard bearer of the lefty for probably 3 decades. I mean, who's been out there defending leftism and liberalism more than Bill Maher for 3 decades? Affleck says you're gross and racist, and then next thing you know, everybody from HuffPo and BuzzFeed, all the usual suspects, are suddenly calling Bill Maher racist and Sam Harris racist. Again, I didn't even know who Sam Harris was at that point. But what I saw was it was the reversal of truth. So the truth was, yes, debate ideas, don't be bigoted towards people. But because an A-list actor overly emoted and showed anger and hostility and moral indignation, suddenly the truth was out the window. And I use that as one of 3 wake-up points in my political career, because it was one of those moments where I go, oh, all the stuff that I was thinking, here was the real world example of it. So it's a little tongue in cheek, obviously, to credit Affleck in the forward, in the acknowledgement. But I did it because, in the dedication, I should say, but I did it because if it wasn't for what he did there, maybe my awakening doesn't happen, or it takes a lot longer to happen.
I think for a lot of us that read your book, and a lot of people are reading a book, again, it's a bestseller, my immediate interpretation of that was somewhat twisted to what you eventually spoke about in the book and what you just explained. And here's the thing that you talk about, and you refer to a default mode or a factory setting, I think you call it, right? Yeah. And the folks like Ben, who may be good people, I don't know him personally, I'm sure there's a lot of good people that have these factory default modes. And I felt that really encompassed your take on your journey, as you talk about in your book, and I've heard you talk about this many times, from progressive media to being now more of an independent common sense voice. Talk about that factory settings that you think that we have kind of in that default mode like your iPhone has.
Yeah, so default mode, factory settings, whatever you want to call it, that concept that if you grow up in America, what you're handed down from culture, from TV, from movies, from our education system, public education system, I should say, that all of these things hand you with some base factory settings that are something like this. It's something like Democrat good, Republican bad. People on the left care about poor people. People on the right care about money. Liberals are anti-war, conservatives are pro-war. There's a series of these things that they all sort of sound right. And it's just what movies hand you, culture hands you, all of these things. And that's what I would say the factory settings are. And then what happens is, and it's exactly what happened to me, the more you start thinking about these things, the more you will realize that the factory settings are actually completely backwards in many cases, or at the very least, they're broken and inefficient and antiquated. And I think breaking out of it is very hard. That's probably why people care about what I do, because I was very upfront when 5 years ago I started saying, hey, guys, liberals, lefties, I'm one of us, right? I believe all the stuff we're supposed to believe, but something's wrong here related to free speech, the outrage mob, identity politics, the collectivist ideas that were just destroying all of the left, what I found very quickly was the left decided to just purge me too. And then next thing you know, all these people on the right, the conservatives, the libertarians, they're all going, hey guys, we're over here. We're willing to agree to disagree. You want to have a drink? You want to sit down for a meal? Let's talk it out. But it's very, very hard for people to break out of that, because once you see, this is sort of why the red pill meme has become so effective, because that moment in The Matrix, which I just watched again a couple weeks ago, when Morpheus puts the two pills out and says, here's the blue pill. You can take this and you'll forever sleep, but you'll have an easy life. You'll never know what the truth is, but your day-to-day will just go on and on and on and on. Versus here's the red pill. You're going to have to swallow some really hard truths to see what the world is, because you'll see what the world is, not what you want it to be. Well, that's a tough choice. And a lot of people would prefer to take that blue pill or just never take the choice at all, which in effect is taking that blue pill. So I was kind of shocked how open the right was to me. And, now it's like, look, I have all sorts of issues that I lay out in that book. Look, pro-choice. I lay out a pro-choice argument in that book. That is like the biggest no-no for the people on the right. Like if you polled the average person that considered themselves on the right or a conservative, if you said, what is the issue you will not bend on in any way, most of them would say abortion. Now, I make a pro-choice argument in this book, which I'm happy to discuss if you want. Yeah. But what I found is nothing but love from people on the right who are loving the book. They're sharing the book. Some people are emailing me going, Dave, I'm not with you on the abortion thing, but your argument makes clear sense. I just don't feel that way. And I agree with you on the other stuff. It's all good. What I'm getting from the left is just an unending torrent of hate. Even if I take the pro-choice argument, even if I take the pro-gay marriage argument, the pro-marijuana argument against the death penalty argument, for some level of state education argument, et cetera, et cetera. So that does tell you that the two sides are not quite equal right now. There's a new movement to say, oh, well, both sides suck, and that's it. Well, that's kind of true, but they don't suck equally, at least at this very moment.
Yeah, they don't. And there's also purplish issues within each of those big issues that you've brought up, you've talked about in the book as well. I think there's a lot of friends of mine that are right of center, and they have serious contention with the idea of what a lot of Democrats, what a lot of leftists and liberals are saying right now is that, pro-choice all the way up to the 9th month. And most people find that abhorrent. But if you start talking about the first 6, 8, 12 weeks, whatever it may be, then you start having some different discussions with people. And I think that, there's different levels that people should be able to have a discussion with without locking you lockstep into one category or the other and say, oh, you're just evil or whatever it may be. And I want to talk about this because you had a journey, and a lot of people know about this. For those people reading the book or followed you may know your story. But for our viewers that may not, again, you were a leftist. You worked with the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur. I mean, you can't get much more bloviating than Cenk when it comes to leftist issues. And you talk about how you left the crew, and you detailed the voicemails and the hate mails that you got from former colleagues. One was a female. I'm going to assume, by the way, that was Anna. I could be wrong. But you didn't mention her name in the book. But it sounded,
just gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, it sounded absolutely just vitriolic and hate-filled. This impacted you physically, didn't it? I mean, just as you were finding your own feet with Larry King and everything that was going on with the new network. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so this was probably the hardest part for me to write because, I'm very comfortable communicating my ideas. If you ask me my opinion on literally any political topic or any current event issue, I'm very comfortable talking about it. I'm more than happy to talk about it. This is what I do all day. It comes very naturally to me. I think one of my skills, I suppose, is that because I've interviewed so many people over the last couple of years, great thinkers, right? Like really great thinkers. I spent a year and a half with Jordan Peterson, and there's a chapter about that. Yep. That, these guys that are professionals, that are pros at whatever their niche thing is, I've spent so much time with them that I think I've been able to then communicate some of their ideas, often in a more digestible way as an average person, because that's what I consider myself to be. So what I did not expect to come from leaving the left, or at that point I wasn't leaving the left. At that point I was still saying, hey, I'm a lefty. But suddenly to watch allies, people that had been invited to my wedding, friends, in some cases family members, not just turn on me, but then suddenly say the worst possible things. You're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a homophobe. I mean, the craziest, most bananas things they could possibly say was shocking. And then, of course, then you get the trolls and the online mob too. It was my first time going through this, which, by the way, I mean, perhaps the most important point of the book is that you must stand up for what you believe in, because they're going to come for you one way or another. You may try to hold everything you believe in till you're 80 years old. And then when you're 80, you're going to slip. And then it's going to come out. And then guess what? They'll destroy you when you're 80 too. So you may as well do it when you're young and you've got some vigor and energy in life and the rest of it. That's not to say it isn't easy. That's not to say that it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. Simple way to put it. But what happened was I started getting all this hate. I had never got it before. And it was coming from what I thought was my team, which made it more shocking. And I was getting a haircut one day, and my stylist, Jess, who's a good friend of mine, she pulled out the mirror and she said, "You better look at this." And I had lost huge chunks. I'm talking like, 2/4 size chunks, about 5 or 6 of them, mostly in the back of my head, starting on the top of my head. And I had developed something called alopecia areata, which is an autoimmune disease. They have no idea why it happens other than stress. And I ended up going on a highly experimental medication with this stuff that I would put on my head that causes basically an allergic reaction, so that your white blood cells attack the reaction as opposed to attacking your hair follicles, because basically it's like putting poison ivy on your head. That caused even worse side effects than losing my hair. I mean, my whole body was red and itchy and scaly, and my head was oozing and gross. Now, as you pointed out, I'm like, my career is taken off right now. Like, so for the first time, like, my career is really exploding. My life is just a disaster. Miraculously, the reaction that I had affected every inch of my body. I mean, I'm not kidding, from my toes to my fingernails, except my face. So I was able to be on camera. We were spraying on my hair, painting. I mean, it was horrible. Like, just like with these fibers and all this stuff to block out all these spots.
Like hair in a can, the spray can stuff?
Yeah, literally. I tried every single one of those things. I can laugh about it now, but it was remember like that old Ron Popeil, infomercial, we're spraying on hair. Look at this guy. Like, I did.
That was real. People were buying that stuff.
Listen, I know they were, and I can also assure you can get high off the fumes. But we tried all of it, and it was a nightmare. And I say this in the book, but I was literally like a half hour away from quitting altogether. I was going to get out altogether, not even do radio, nothing. I was just like, my life is a disaster. This is not worth the pain.
And Rubin Report just got picked up by Larry King's new network. What was it called?
Aura TV. So that's
Aura.
really where the show kicked off. I started with them in September of 2015. The symptoms started kicking in around December of that month. And then they were really, really hitting by February. And if you watch that Why I Left the Left video, which is that famous video that I did for PragerU, it's got like 20 million views. Well, first off, they had to put a ton of makeup on me. But I mean, I have huge bags under my eyes. My hair is sprayed out to wazoo. This is all real. This is just hairspray now. It has come back. It's got a nice ending to the story. But I was miserable. As close as I could probably ever be to being just suicidal, like just what a disaster. Because think how bizarre it is to think, wow, I'm finally putting out into the world what I believe to be true, and to be hit back with something else. So it was a really, really miserable time. And the reason I talk about it in the book is not for pity points. It's not even to have some cathartic moment or something. It truly is because I want people to know you're going to go through something rough. I've talked to other people in the public sphere who've been through the mob, been through the hate, and they maybe didn't lose their hair, but they've had other versions of this when your friends turn on you and the rest of it. But it's important for people to know you will get through it. And everyone that I've seen get through it is better on the other side.
What gave you the impetus to decide to push through? Because you basically almost walked away in your mind. You were done. And what was the turn?
I mean, there were a couple things that when it was really bottoming out, and I tell this story of I was at a really trendy restaurant in West Hollywood one night, and it's always warm in LA, even in the winter it's warm here, but we were on a rooftop and I was standing under a heat lamp, and I was super sensitive to heat at that time, which try to be in LA while you're sensitive to heat. I mean, my body, I'm telling you, it was on fire all the time, but I got under this heat lamp and my head was, I mean, I can't even describe it properly. Goo was dripping out of my head. Like I was having this disgusting, like sci-fi, like alien goo, like dripping all over me. I'm dripping. I ran out of the restaurant. I puked. I almost passed out in the street. I lived a few blocks away from the restaurant at the time. And I went to bed and there was hair all over my pillow and like there was even blood because it was also itchy. So I was like itching it a lot. Like
you said you were worried you had AIDS, HIV.
I thought I had cancer. I thought everything known to man. I took all the tests and thank God I'm okay and I didn't have anything. But I thought I had no idea what was going on. Anyway, what really turned it around was in a moment in clarity the next morning, and I had a miserable night's sleep. I remember I cried. I actually cried like I was like, it's over. And the next morning, and I think many people have this moment in life when like everything feels like, you know, whatever they say about rock bottom or you just got nothing left. I really did think about the people that came before me. And I mentioned in the book, both of my grandfathers fought in World War II. My grandfather on my mom's side flew planes. On my father's side, he fixed engines. I grew up around Holocaust survivors. I know sort of in many ways, very brutal history of my family and everyone that's come to America. Why did your ancestors come here from wherever they came? It's like they probably survived fascism or a famine or something to just say, oh, can I just get on that freaking boat to maybe have a chance? And I know it sounds sort of corny or something, but like, I really was just like, I have to just keep going. Like what other life is there after this if I don't keep going now? So I did keep going and I stopped taking the medication after that because that was, I thought, worse than the problem in the first place. And then slowly it started coming together and my life got better and I'm much better about dealing with stress now. And I know what that monster is. And I guess I stared it down, I suppose.
And congratulations on that. And on behalf of all of your, viewers, thank you for making that decision, because I think what you've done is you've opened up, here at Whiskey Politics, I think you're episode 238 or something like this. We've been doing this for some time. And like you grew up watching Larry King. I grew up, watching Dick Cavett and Phil Donahue and these guys, and the long form discussions that we sit down, and there's a lot of people that are doing what you do. You're right up there. You've got the exposure. But, the idea today to have this dialogue, it seems to me that mainstream media doesn't want to have any part of this. I don't know if it's just production value, doesn't pay as much as having people screaming at each other or whatever it may be. But you really did the record scratch moment in what, I was listening to podcasts when Joe Rogan started in 2009, 2010, Adam Carolla. None of my friends knew what a podcast was. And I was just downloading it. And I was like, no, this is real discussion. And that's what you've taken to that next level. So thank you for making that decision.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. Let me throw in one other thing there, because you mentioned Larry King, who, has become a friend and a mentor. And as I described him in the acknowledgments, really a bonus grandfather. The only reason I started doing my long form show, which, now there's a gajillion of them, which, by the way, I love that there's a gajillion of them. And if somebody's doing it better than me or more interestingly than me or in another way that I'm doing it, I think that's great. I love competition. I really do. I mean, I don't think suddenly there's going to be 100 more and then I'm just going to disappear. But you know what? If that started happening, I'll find something else to do. So I am okay with that. But what I would say is that there's a through line to what you're talking about when you talk about all the talking heads and the screaming and CNN getting rid of Larry King. That is not a coincidence. When Larry King left CNN, which they said was, retirement, but it was really them just pushing, they wanted to go younger or whatever. He had either, I forget, but everyone can check this. It was either the #1 or #2 rated show on the entire network. And what did they do when they got rid of him? They brought in Piers Morgan, who was a British tabloid guy, basically. And he took what was I think the best interview show, long form interview show for 25 years. And he turned it into a sort of tabloid, let's fight everything, let's do all the stuff that you just mentioned that we don't like anymore. And then what happened? CNN's ratings have subsequently tumbled from that point to now where they're basically the worst they've ever been. I think things are a little higher now because of coronavirus, because everyone's just glued to news now. But I don't think that's a coincidence that when you get rid of, think how few trusted people there are right now. I mean, I think this is one of the biggest problems we have as a society. We don't have trusted voices. Larry King was a pretty trusted voice.
Not in mainstream media.
Yeah. Who do we have? I mean, yeah, no. So alternative media or YouTube or podcast.
Right.
Yeah, there's some of us now that I think more people are trusting, and that's great. But we need, I mean, I still believe this now. This is why I'm not one of the burn it down people, like burn it all down people. I'm a sort of like, let's figure out what's wrong with the institutions, what's wrong with media, and let's see what we can save and what we can fix. Now, I may be wrong. I have friends, Michael Malice, who's one of my favorite guests. You know, he's a sort of just burn it down thing. The cathedral has failed us. The institutions have failed us. Burn it down. I would prefer not to, because I don't know what comes out on the other side. I would prefer to work with what we've got. Maybe that can work, maybe not. But I'm really interested in that through line of you get rid of trusted people and then you sort of reap what you sow.
I think so. And also it's a way for people to, when I say people, mainstream media, to control the narrative. And if you step outside of your box that you're supposed to be in, blue pill, red pill, whatever it may be, then you are considered persona non grata. And, you know, going back to Young Turks, there seems to still be bad blood there. Cenk Uygur, he just tweeted, I'm going to put this up here. According to the New York Times bestseller list, some organization is doing bulk buys of Rubin reports book. Media never talk about this. There is endless money for right-wing grifters. Billionaires finance all the so-called grassroots conservatives. I'm sorry, classic liberals. I mean, that's just downright insanely mean. You responded, hi, Cenk, like everything you spew, that is a lie. 107 copies of the over 20,000 sold were bulk, and we have the receipts from Penguin Random House themselves, but I'll be a sport. Prove I'm lying, and I'll donate $5,000 to any Armenian genocide charity of your choice. Fantastic response. Why are they still going after you? Are you that much of a threat?
Yeah, I mean, their ideas are bad. You know, I haven't said, he's gone after me, and they've gone after me relentlessly since I've left. I haven't said a word publicly about them in years. He's, you know, he attacks me on Twitter all the time. I muted him, so I don't even see them. I just ignore them. It's not important. I'm happy with what I'm doing. I'd rather blaze new trails than think about, you know, scorched earth behind me. I didn't want to respond to that, but he blatantly, to imply that I have billionaires buying my books in bulk. We had one organization that bought 107 copies, and actually this week, this is here. I'm dropping this for the first time. I'm not sure when you're posting this. This week we have one other nonprofit that we're going to donate 500 copies to people that have lost their job because of COVID or our first responders. We're going to announce that, I think, later today or tomorrow. But out of the 20,000 copies sold in my first week, I mean, you saw, I was busting my ass with promotions, signing copies left and right, whatever I could do to get this message out to people because I believe in this book. So his I mean, but this is what the left does with everything. You're funded by billionaires. You're a grifter. I mean, look, he took $20 million from some VC. He's in bed with Al Jazeera, which is from the government of Qatar that uses slave labor. I mean, I don't even care about any of that stuff. I mean, they're jealous of what I'm doing. It's okay. Like, keep going. But the reason I responded to that one was because there was a real implication that I've somehow gamed the system or something. And I'm so proud of what we've done here. So trust me, I sat there for a half hour. I mean, he wasted a half hour of my life where I crafted that tweet and had to go, am I sending it or not? And yeah, and then everyone, you know, basically everyone was on my side. But nobody cares about these little fights anymore. I'm much more interested. If you disagree with me and you do it respectfully, let's build a good world together. These people who just want to destroy everything, I think their day is done.
You talk about that in the book. You talk about something called a political closet. Now, you're gay. Everybody knows that. And I don't particularly care what anybody's sexuality is.
I don't particularly care either. I'm gay with one guy. That's it.
Yeah,
we're good. You know, okay.
You know, we had Mo
mostly in the house, you know.
We had Mo Vela on last week. He was Biden's senior advisor. And 40 minutes, 50 minutes into the interview, he told me he was gay. I had no idea. It's like, but he wore it as a badge of honor because we were talking about identity politics and why Biden is so focused on choosing a woman for a VP. That's like his number one thing. So we were talking about that, but talk a little bit about from the perspective of the political closet. What is it? Why are people in it? And is there a political closet also? I guess this is a two-part question. Is there also a political closet on the right as well?
Yeah. So the political closet that I'm focusing on, and I should say that what I believe about the political closet and any sort of closet in general, you can be closeted about anything. You know, people think of the closet, you're closeted about sexuality. That's generally what people apply to it. And that's why I even bother mentioning my sexuality in the book. I mentioned it a few other times because I happen to be married. We're trying to have kids. There are things that are relevant to my life, but it wasn't writing it like I'm gay, so you best believe what I believe, or you're a homophobe, something like that. I think the biggest political group in America right now, the most underserved political group, is the politically closeted. What I would describe those people as right now are sort of ex-lefties or disaffected liberals who have had it with identity politics, who have had it with collectivism and socialism and progressivism, which isn't, if you told me progressivism was we're going to progress to where all people are treated equally under the law, well, congratulations, I'd be a progressive. And that's when it used to be good, when we were saying, oh, we want black people to vote, we want women to vote, we want gay marriage. Those are lofty goals to create equality. But progressing just for the sake of progressing so that you can have more power over some and give power to others, that's not progressing, that's regressing, which I'm very proud that I only said the word regressive once in the book, because I know there's a lot of meme makers out there that every time I say regressive go crazy. But I think that this giant group of liberals, basically, good liberals, old school New York, let's say California liberals, I don't mean crazy progressive far left activists. There were good people in that group. JFK asked not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Our great senator in the state that I grew up, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who talked about the scary Constitution. I added scary there because it's obviously not scary. He talked about the Constitution. He talked about the Bill of Rights. Mayor Ed Koch, New York City. This was a great liberal mayor for all of the people of his city. But they have been mugged. The remaining liberals have been mugged, or as I've described it, basically, it's like when Palpatine ordered execute Order 66 in Revenge of the Sith, and they've hunted down all the liberals like they hunted down the Jedi, and there's pretty much no liberals left. So I would say Howard Stern sort of exists, but he's on Sirius XM. He's not as relevant as he used to be. Bill Maher exists. I'm here trying to wave that flag. I think there's a couple others, but in effect, the liberals have all disappeared. They're cowed by silence. And I think what happened is that the progressives saw the weakness of liberalism. And this is very hard for me to admit, but I believe it's true. Liberals, because they're open-minded, liberals, because they're tolerant, they have a weakness that I think conservatives don't have, which is why right now, wherever social justice gets in, it destroys the institution. We're seeing this across the board at universities. We're seeing this at news outlets. We're seeing this at TV networks. We're seeing this at ESPN. The openness of liberalism lets in a bunch of terrible collectivist ideas, and then it destroys the entire institution, while conservative organizations basically don't have that weakness. And I think I talk about this in chapter 9. I think there's a religious reason for this, or a belief reason for this, let's say, and they're surviving. So I believe that the politically closeted are the people that don't know what their home is. They're going, the left is completely bananas. AOC and Joe Biden have nothing to do with each other. Why are these people in the same party? Putting aside the rest of the problems with Biden. And then a lot of them have either some like visceral aversion to Trump, or they've spent so much of their lives attacking conservatives that they're so afraid to admit that they actually might be one now. So that politically closeted group, I think that's the group that's going to decide the election. The question is, which way will they go? I have my suspicions.
The question is, how are those politically closeted individuals responding to be just named, racists or homophobes or xenophobes? I mean, you got a chapter in your book. It's called "Don't Worry, You're Not a Nazi." You had family that suffered their fate in the hands of the Nazis. I'm the son of my grandfather. I was born and raised in England. He fought in the RAF and was shot down in Nazi-occupied France and was a POW for 4 years. My father fought off the anti-Semites that were beating him up every day as a child in East End of London. And he looked at this, the orange trees of California on the dummy boxes of fake oranges in World War II and said, that's where I want to take my children. We moved here in the 70s. As someone who believes in conservatism, not right-wing, left-wing, or whatever it is, but conservative values, not all of it, but a lot of it, again, you're gay, I'm a Jew, we deal with that level of incoming, but what is the response that you have to those on the left who use those, essentially those epithets as tools to control us, saying, hey, if you are outside of our box, you must be that Nazi. Or if you're not a Nazi, you're certainly a collaborator. I mean, you've been called a Nazi collaborator, right?
Yeah, you name it, I've been called it. Look, I would say that this is why I've tried to explain to people that progressivism, wokeism, leftism, socialism. I keep saying they're going to drop the democratic part out of socialism, and I think we're seeing it happen right now. Bernie is going to be the last mainstream guy to run as a democratic socialist. The next ones are just going to run as socialists. And by the way, they will destroy Bernie in the process, because at the end, he's just an old white man who will have sold out to Hillary and to Biden, and they'll take him out too. So that'll be the sort of just desserts for Bernie. But to directly answer your question, what the left has done here is, by using all of these words, it's not just what they've done to the people on the right, it's what they've done to themselves. Because once you wake up and whoa, I've been calling everybody a bigot and a Nazi, and then you go, wait a minute, maybe they're not bigots and Nazis. Well, now you know what your guys are going to do to you. So it actually becomes a self-hostage situation. It's basically, I've described it sort of as a whole bunch of people standing in a circle with a gun, and everyone is sort of itching to shoot first because you're about to be shot. That pretty much is what the left has done here. So think about it. On the right now, as you just, look, I'm gay, married, I'm pro-choice. I could go through a whole bunch of other things. But my political allies in this space right now would include Dennis Prager, would include Ben Shapiro, would include Glenn Beck, Tucker Carlson. These are all people who I've found common cause because we believe in freedom, we believe in individual rights. From an American context, we believe in the Constitution. On the left, please show me where people are debating ideas on the left without destroying each other. It really doesn't happen. It's basically, you got to buy into this whole thing, but the second you question it, we must destroy you. And this is what the left has basically created, and it's a self-perpetuating prophecy. And there's very little to fight it. This is what I'm saying when I said earlier that the liberals have been sort of executed throughout the galaxy. There's no liberals stopping this anymore. I'm embarrassed in a way. I would say I have friends and former colleagues that used to really fight the liberal cause that have just sort of checked out or are quiet now because they don't want to be thought of as a Trump supporter. That would be the scariest thing. But they really don't want to be thought of as a conservative. But as I say all the time, defending my liberal principles is becoming a conservative position.
This isn't just in the United States, Dave. We're seeing this
not
across
at all.
the globe. Like I said, I'm from England. I got family in Australia. We're seeing a certain awakening happening. Israel, Brazil, Australia, Poland, Spain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is that? What is that is happening?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm glad you mentioned this because I've brought it up in a couple other interviews, and I'm really fascinated by this because the idea that these ideas are spreading worldwide, and this is the beauty and the danger and the whole mess of the internet, like happening everywhere at once. So the UK had a major election, what was it, 4 months ago? Labour, the leftist, woke, progressive party, got destroyed. And in effect, which I think was a good thing, obviously, in effect, I would say Britain moved a little more center-right because of that. You mentioned Israel. They've been moving center-right now for decades, but their old Labour Party, or Meretz, the far-left party, these things have been decimated from the political sphere. Australia's last election, again, about 6-8 months ago, they moved to the right. Poland and some of the other Eastern European countries, they're all moving to the right. They're all figuring out what their borders are. They're moving against the EU, against globalism. I think it's coming here to America too, and I actually think that is a good thing. Now, the X factor in all of this, of course, is that COVID and the response and the 2-month lockdown that we're in, that now we don't know when we're getting out of, and that it's a worldwide thing. And, in the United States, states are going to open up differently, which is a wonderful thing that we're able to give some power to the states to do that. That's the right and the duty of the state, actually. I think that could challenge some of the trends we're having, just because if economies collapse all over the place, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people will turn to government. But I would say, to directly answer your question, I'm quite hopeful for the shape of the world right now, because I do think this awakening has happened all over the place. I think a lot of people are going, wait a minute, the government doesn't have to be the end all and be all in my life. I should have whatever philosophic belief I have for the world. I should have whatever religious belief or non-religious, but I should have some framework to view the world. And then the government that protects me in my country is just there to protect my rights, not to necessarily give me things or take my things and give them to other people. I think that is such a clean, honest, decent message that the only thing that can destroy that message is the gun and the mob, and that's why we have to stop them.
You talk about the democracy of ideas, and you and your fellow, dark intellectual web guys that you work with, some of whom we've had on our show here. I see that as being ubiquitous across the globe now. I'm sure you get viewers from people. We get viewers from Israel and other countries around the world. So this democratization of ideas, I see that as expanding and growing. But a lot of that has to be controlled by media. A lot of people talk about bias media in the United States. And I remember Bernard Goldberg's book back in 2002 or 3, whatever it was, Bias, that came out. And he originally stated, and I'd love your thought on this. He originally stated that, and he just had an article that came out a couple of weeks ago that responded back to this. He says, almost 20 years ago, I would have said, there's not inherent bias in the idea that in the media, and this is in early 2000, that people wake up every day and decide that they want to take out George W. Bush and sit in a room and strategize like it's a war room. But it's a collective of individuals that went to the same schools, they go to the same cocktail parties, and they sit down, and their worldview is their worldview, and it's their right worldview because nobody else has a different worldview because they never go west of the Hudson. But 20 years later, that has all changed, hasn't it? We have activists now as journalists.
Yeah, so I haven't seen the article you're referring to from Bernie Goldberg, but I know him, and I've read a ton of his stuff and watched him for years. And I think he's making an interesting distinction, if I'm understanding you correctly. It used to be sort of an implicit bias or sort of a self-selected bias because of the worldview. And I suspect what he's saying now is, no, now it's different. Like, this thing has been unmasked to the point that it can't be implicit bias anymore. Well, I completely agree with that. I mean, I have a whole chapter on fake news here, and just what we're seeing in the last couple of days. I mean, this Chuck Todd interview that you probably saw, Attorney General Barr, and he implies that Barr just says something like, well, history is written by the winners, as if, oh, I can do whatever I want because as long as we win, that's the way it's going to be recorded. When in fact, if you listen to literally the next 20 seconds, which of course they didn't play on Meet the Press, you hear him say, but I think we've done the right thing here, and I think history will look kindly at us because we're trying to root out corruption and the rest of it. Well, that gets played all over the internet, and I went on a little Twitter thread this morning that got hot because it's like, if NBC doesn't fire Chuck Todd, and I don't mean this in terms of outrage culture destroying Chuck Todd. You are the host of Meet the Press, which was at one time the most important political program on television. Now it's not really anymore because almost everything except Fox News has been unmasked as a basic corporate backing of the DNC across the board, which is why Fox News gets so much crap because they're the only counterpoint. That doesn't mean they're perfect, by the way, but they are the only right-leaning one in mainstream. So when Chuck Todd does this selectively edited, manipulative video that, of course, fits the narrative that he's trying to push all the time, if NBC doesn't fire him, or at the very least, fire the producer, because the producer had to go through with the editor to say when we're going to cut this stuff, right? If he didn't do that, or because then it either shows that Chuck Todd is just inept and has no idea what he's doing, that he watched the clip privately and said it's okay to cut there, in which case that's a fireable offense. Like, I can't imagine for a mainstream journalist to have a more fireable offense. Or he better throw the producer under the bus and say, no, I didn't even watch the whole clip. They handed me that. I thought it was right, and that's it. And admit you're just a jackass, basically. But neither one of those things is going to happen. NBC News tweeted at somebody. They didn't do a public tweet. They, as far as I know, they did an at tweet to say that, oh, they kind of dropped the ball on this.
Made an error.
An error that always goes the same exact way. An error that always, an error that every time they play the Trump, good people on both sides thing, forget to play the part right before where he says nobody stands, that the neo-Nazis must be condemned fully. The error always goes one way. And I think that's what people have had it with. And so again, journalists, air quote journalists, are the ones destroying journalism.
It's interesting because you talk about that. We saw that with Jimmy Kimmel and Mike Pence, that video was a joke by Jimmy Kimmel, and CBS and a couple of other stations took that video from Jimmy Kimmel as if Jimmy Kimmel's producing actual real news. And it made it look like, Vice President Pence was just doing some kind of, publicity stunt, moving boxes of ventilators, whatever. But they don't learn their lesson. And this is the problem that I have. And I want your input on this because mainstream media, I believe, unfortunately, even with good folks like yourself and others that are out there that are producing alternative content to the mainstream. We've got people sitting in their living rooms right now, 24/7, focused on their local news and the mainstream news networks, because that is the news of the day. You're prolific on Twitter. You understand how the blue check marks essentially choose what the news is that's going to promulgate into, the headlines of the day. They decide. They're mostly activists. But I have to ask you this, because this is, for me, I think, a major issue regarding the future of journalism in this country and whether or not it could be trusted. I think journalists believe inherently that they are a moral good, that they're going to report on the stories regarding, for example, and you talk about this in your book, gender differences, and that there's no difference between men and women or whatever it is. And it seems as if they're angling their storylines and narratives to ensure that the extreme right is going to be taken out. That anybody that shares that political side of the aisle is going to be lumped in to that. And so while 80, 90, 99% of the people don't believe in, homophobic views or racist views or whatever it may be, it's almost like a moral preening or a moral superiority, and their leftist virtual signaling. It's a way for them to try and correct behavior of the tiniest minorities. And are they doing that at the expense of majorities? And do you think the majorities have had enough? Are they going to start fighting back?
Yeah, well, I think that gets to a few things that we've talked about already, which is partly that we're watching the trends happening worldwide right now. So there's a pushback that's happening in India even. I mean, there's a pushback that's happening all over the world to this nonsense, because they used to be able to mask it, and now the internet lets us see it. I would love to talk to Bernie Goldberg about that. If he thinks that his article 20 years ago was actually fully correct, in that it was just their implicit bias because they go to the same parties and they go to the same schools, or that it was because they knew they could get away with it, where now they still think they can get away with it, but they can't quite get away with it. I would be really interested to talk to him about that. That would be a rich place to have a conversation. And by the way, I wonder about that myself. Sometimes when I say something like, oh, well, the media used to be better, or the New York Times wasn't always this bad, I'll get conservatives, usually probably older conservatives, probably in their 50s or 60s, going, no, Dave, you're just seeing it now, but it always was like this. And I don't know. I mean, the truth is, I don't know, because I wasn't around for all of that. So I do wonder. It's
funny, because in 1992, I was behind a pickup truck, and it said, don't believe the liberal media for the Bush-Clinton election. In 1992, don't believe the liberal media. This is nothing new.
So look, some people, who knows? It could be some combination of all of the things we're talking about, right? So who knows? But I think this issue with the media and their unending and inability to stop themselves right now, they're taking themselves out. And in some ways, you really have to understand it, not at a conspiratorial level, but at the level of giant corporate media exists. Now it's imploding, but everyone's trying to ransack the room and grab the copper wiring, and they're all just trying to profit on the way out. They know they're done. Anderson Cooper, I have nothing against Anderson Cooper, but it's like, when CNN's done, guess what? Anderson Cooper's done. Now, he's a Vanderbilt. He'll be okay either way. But like when CNN's done, Lemon's out the door, and that's it.
Stelter.
Stelter. These are nobodies without the chair that they sit in. If Brian Stelter had the equal footing that I have, right? I had to build something myself. This is my house. We're in my garage. I built a television studio here. So I was way ahead on the home studio thing. Now everyone's doing it out of their kitchen. But it's like, I built something that's real. I'm incredibly proud of it. And the business behind it is totally congruent with all of my ideas that I preach on the show. Nobody cares about Stelter. Like, there's no Stelter fans out there who really believe that this guy's telling the truth. There's people that go, oh, here's the egg-headed guy on CNN that we put on when we're sort of having our bagel in the morning and falling asleep again. And that's it. So the chair is worth something more than he is. And as those institutions crumble, all you're seeing is everyone's just grabbing whatever they can get at the end just so that they can survive a little bit more in the profit machine to keep it going.
Do you think COVID-19 has allowed us to basically, the veneer is off now? We're seeing them for who they really are. They're nobody special. Your program, a lot of programs I watch on YouTube, the content is so much better than what we're hearing from mainstream.
Yeah.
Do you think people are seeing that?
Well, I thank you for the compliment, but it's barely a compliment because it's like, yeah, look, I come into this studio, my garage, whenever I do a show. If I'm interviewing somebody, I want to find out the most I can about them. I've never tried to get anybody in an interview.
Right.
Whether I agree with them or not, I almost think is irrelevant. It's just like, let's hear these ideas and let's see what happens. I have found over the last couple of months that I've had to start doing some sort of news stuff in my live streams because the media has been exposed so badly. But I would say CNN is basically a WWE skit at this point. Chris Cuomo coming out of his basement where he pretends that he hid there and was chattering. So he was so cold one night or overheating one night, he cracked a tooth from chattering because of COVID. And then he comes up, I've been down there for weeks. And then it turns out 3 days before or 5 days before, he got into a fight with a bicyclist outside of his house. It's like, you guys are literally just making things up. And has it all been fully exposed? It's really hard for people to accept that it's as bad as it is, but it is as bad as it is.
Somebody asked me just this last week, who is my favorite and my least favorite guest? We haven't done as near a number of you have of shows. We're in our mid 200s. But I knew mine right out of the gate. And I'll be happy to talk about it because I think, we've had incredible guests. They're all incredible. But do you have a favorite and a least favorite?
I'd be curious who your favorite and least favorite were. Whether I know them or not, I'd be curious.
My favorite was Victor Davis Hanson. He's been on the show a few times.
We're going to have him on. We're going to have him on.
Oh, he's incredible. You can discuss anything. He's a classicist from the Greek wars and philosophy, World War II, Trump, today, everything that is happening. My least favorite, a guy a lot of people may not even know. His name is Cody Wilson. He's the inventor of the ghost gun, the 3D printer.
Oh, interesting.
And I had this discussion with him. He's about as libertarian as you can get. And I raised the issue, and I took a huge amount of incoming, Dave, on our platforms of people that were angry that I asked them the question. Because he said, free speech online is free speech unlimited, no limitations. I said, what about child pornography? And he got really angry with me about making the comparison. I said, I'm not comparing anything you're doing to child pornography.
Right, of course.
It's free speech. Ironically, it was a great interview. Besides that particular area of the discussion, he got angry, but the rest of it was, I thought, very, very good. Well, ironically, 3 weeks later, he was arrested and indicted for soliciting underage sex. So a lot of people came back. Credit to those people on the platform. They were like, okay, yeah, you were kind of prescient there right there. But he was probably my least because of that. All right, you.
So my answer to that question, it's hard to look. The easy answer, the true and easy answer on my favorite ones, when I've had Jordan Peterson here, especially, and I'm talking about before we toured together, when he was Jordan Peterson, that was just on the rise, this quirky Canadian psychologist that nobody could quite tell, is he crazy or brilliant, or is it both, and what are his intentions, and all of this stuff. Because I was feeling it out along with everyone else. But what I loved about it was that I could see here was this brilliant man who never wanted to be a star. He was a clinical psychologist and a professor talking about the Bible, talking about cleaning your room, personal responsibility. This is not the sexiest stuff in the world. But suddenly, his expertise became rare in a world that desperately needed it. So I could feel it happening. And I think also on a very personal note, I think it was filling a certain void in my life, which I write about in chapter 9 once we actually were on tour. So I think he's sort of the easy answer on that. I would say the other one on the favorite side, if I just pick one that's not as cliche, let's say for me, when I had Richard Lewis in here, who's a comic that I've always absolutely adored, and he's in Curb Your Enthusiasm, and he's always doing this. I just loved every moment of it. As an interview, it was like, with a guy like him, you just wind him up and you let him go, and I could have actually just sat like this the whole time. But at the end, when we walked out, and if you watch Curb, you know this, that him and Larry David, and a lot of these comedians, they're germaphobes for some reason, one way or another. A lot of comedians are germaphobes. I don't happen to be. But as I was walking him out of my house, he put his hand out. He put his hand on my face like this, and he goes, "Dave, you're a wonderful interviewer." And I just thought that was nice. Richard Lewis, a guy who I loved when I was,
It wasn't just a compliment; it was going beyond his comfort level.
Yeah, and I
Wow.
remember watching this guy on the HBO Young Comedian
Me
special
too.
when I was probably 9 years old.
Yeah.
Dangerfield hosted it. I think it's the same one that Jerry Seinfeld makes his debut.
Do you remember Bob
Lewis.
Nelson?
Oh yeah, he was in it.
Helmet and the shoulder pads. He was on that one.
Yeah. So it's Bob Nelson, Seinfeld, Richard Lewis.
Yeah.
I think Howie Mandel's in it. And if you watch it now, I mean, Lewis it's like he's doing something else. He's not even doing comedy. You know, Jerry does he's doing stand-up comedy.
Right.
Richard Lewis just does like a whole other thing. So I would say those two in that. In terms of that, I really couldn't say one that I didn't. It's not that I haven't enjoyed them. I just don't even think it would be worth it to mention it. You know what I mean? It's like
okay. I guess it's not so much like least favorite, but any you regret.
Any I regret.
Anybody you regret giving a platform to?
No, there's nobody I regret giving a platform to. I know I've had some people on here who, after I've had them on, have said, noxious things or something like that. I don't have a time machine. I can't redo all that. I'm also not saying every interview I've done has been perfect. Maybe I missed a follow-up question. Maybe I should have asked a different question. I will give you one, though, that's an interesting example of why being an interviewer can be tough when people know your opinions, which now people know my opinions. When I had Marianne Williamson on, when she was running for president, she had that moment, that like 2-week moment where people thought it might be real. Yeah. And I had her on in the middle of it, and I'm sitting here with her, and she's a collectivist. She believes in collective guilt. She believes white people should be wandering around apologizing to black people and reparations. And she believes in, you should group gays together in straights and whites and black. It's so antithetical to everything I believe that halfway through the interview, I had to stop her and say, just FYI, you're a collectivist and I'm an individualist. I just need it to be known to the audience and to you that we just fundamentally look at the world in a different way. Otherwise, it would have looked like I was just letting her steamroll me. And what I did realize in that moment is the more that I am outward about my opinions, and it's like, now I got a freaking book with all of them in there. It's like the more that is known about me, the more difficult that it will make my job as an interviewer. It's something I've been thinking quite a bit about lately.
Well, Dave, listen, keep doing what you're doing, man. You're changing culture and you're changing the world. And we all live in our little own echo chambers. And when you are able to enlighten somebody that thought they knew everything there was to know about politics, and all of a sudden they're going, I didn't see it that way. You're changing hearts and minds. And I think that goes deeper than politics. I think that goes deeper than celebrity. It's about thinking. So I just want to say thank you for doing what you're doing. Keep up the great work. Congratulations on the book. And by the way, down the road when this whole thing is over, we'd love to have you at the studio. A new studio upcoming, Crave News, and we've got the Whiskey Politics bar. So we'd love to have a sit down and actually have a drink and do a cheers together.
Great, fantastic. That would be awesome.
Great, Dave. Thank you so much for taking the time. Greatly appreciate it. Tell everybody where they can find you in the book, please.
Oh, well, you can go to don'tburnthisbook.com and you can get it at Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all that good stuff. And we're Rubin Report everywhere else.
Great. Thanks so much, Dave, and best of luck with everything.
Thanks.
Cheers. And folks, thank you for joining us as well. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dave. Listen, good guy there. I mean, he's taken a tremendous amount of incoming, and it's really interesting. You always have to think to yourself from the standpoint of, how would you react to those type of barbs and arrows that are being hit at you by, in many cases, former friends? I mean, you got to have a really thick skin. And so thank you, Dave, for joining us. And, the way that I look at a lot of what we discussed is very much old school liberal, as Dave was talking about, very much John Locke. I mean, an interesting discussion point I should have raised in the interview, but we obviously went beyond our time. This week marks Friedrich Hayek's birthday. One of the most prodigious classical liberal scholars of the 20th century. And, that type of independent thinking, libertarian thinking, classic liberal thinking when it comes to culture and economics and basically self-autonomy are the things that I'm hoping that a lot of people today are waking up and realizing that we do need as a culture. We do need as a populace and as a country and as a world from a global standpoint for us to be successful. That you don't want individual elites with maybe a predetermined focus on how you should live your life. We're seeing that right now with COVID and the protests that are happening right now. There's a lot of people that want to be able to make up their own minds regarding opening their stores. Yeah, I'm going to have face masks and people can squeeze some Purell and we'll have social distancing, but I don't want the government to determine my outcome. And that's exactly what, when we talk about John Locke or Friedrich Hayek or whatever it may be, what Dave Rubin is talking about here with classic liberalism. He referred to JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. When did we get to the point when it was all about what somebody could do for me? And that is leftism today. That's progressivism. That is big government. So I'm so happy that we have people like Dave Rubin and others that are out there that are voicing this in a compelling, easy to digest way for people to sit down and watch these types of interviews that Dave and I had today, where we're having a discussion. We're having a few laughs, and if we were in person, we'd throw back a couple of drinks. And that is what is missing right now from our mainstream media. Unfortunately, so many people, and it isn't just COVID, but they're locked into their groupthink watching this stuff 24/7. It's like a fire hose of this constant propaganda, almost agitprop. So thank you, Dave Rubin, for joining us today. And viewers, please, thank you for joining us and watching this as well. Let us know what you thought. Do you take any contention with any of the ideas that we discussed today? Let us know on the comment section of whatever platform it is that you're watching us. And thank you for joining us as well. Again, you can find us on all YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Ricochet.com, Stitcher, Google Play, and the like. We've got some announcements coming up. And if you can and you're enjoying the show, we don't have a Patreon account. This is not a membership. We're doing this so that you can watch this for free. But if you have a couple of extra ducats and you want to send them our way for appreciation, we'd greatly appreciate it. You can find it at paypal.me/mywhiskeypolitics. And so we'll be back here again real soon at Whiskey Politics with more interviews with fascinating individuals. Thanks for joining us, folks. Cheers.